It is April 19th, 1943. The Atlantic Ocean rolls in gray-green swells beneath an overcast sky. A Spanish fisherman's net snags something in the waters off the coast of Andalusia, near the small town of Huelva. What surfaces is not treasure, but a corpse. The body of a Royal Marine officer in advanced decomposition, still wearing a uniform. Attached to his wrist by a chain is a leather briefcase, waterlogged but sealed, containing documents marked with the highest classification stamps of the British government. Within hours, this corpse, this briefcase, and the extraordinary intelligence contained within those papers will set in motion one of the most audacious deceptions of the entire war. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, the plan that would fool Hitler himself about where the Allies would strike next, fundamentally altering the course of the Second World War and establishing tactics that would reverberate through military strategy for decades to come. The moment is both tragic and calculated. The man in the water was not in fact a Royal Marine at all. He was a civilian named Glinder Michael, a tramp from South Wales who had died of pneumonia in a London mortuary weeks earlier. His body had been requisitioned by the British intelligence services for a purpose he would never have imagined in life. The briefcase, chained to his wrist, contained meticulously crafted forgeries, each one a masterpiece of deception. These were not random documents. They were designed to appear as genuine correspondence between senior military officials discussing Operation Husky, the forthcoming invasion of Sicily. But the invasion plans contained within them were false. They were a lie, a theatrical construction, a phantom threat designed to pull German forces away from the very beaches where the Allies intended to land. And as this corpse bobbed in the Spanish waters, as Spanish fishermen hauled it aboard their boats, as the documents began their journey into German hands, the greatest intelligence coup of the war was already unfolding. To understand why Britain needed mincemeat, one must first grasp the desperate situation facing the Allies in early 1943. The Normandy invasion, what would eventually become D-Day, remained more than a year away. Before that, the Allies needed to establish themselves in the Mediterranean. Sicily was the objective. It was also, from a military perspective, an obvious target. German and Italian commanders would expect it. The island sat at the crossroads of the Mediterranean, a natural stepping stone towards mainland Italy and eventually Europe itself. From a purely rational standpoint, if you were an Allied general planning operations in the Mediterranean, Sicily was where you would strike next. The problem was that the Germans knew this too. Intelligence reports in early 1943 made it abundantly clear that German forces in the Mediterranean were bracing for exactly such an invasion. Reinforcements were being moved to Sicily. Coastal defenses were being strengthened. The Axis commanders had rightly concluded that the Allies could not remain idle forever, and the most logical target was directly beneath their feet. If the invasion went ahead with the element of surprise already lost, the casualty figures would be catastrophic. Estimates suggested that a defended invasion of Sicily could cost the Allies anywhere between 30,000 and 50,000 casualties. That was not a number the Allies could sustain. The invasion would be a slaughter, and morale would collapse. The entire Mediterranean strategy would be jeopardized. Something had to be done to shift the focus of German attention elsewhere. Something had to make the Germans believe that the invasion was coming somewhere else entirely. That something was mincemeat. The man who conceived Operation Mincemeat was Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of RAF Intelligence, working within a secret department called the London Controlling Section. Cholmondeley was not a military man in the traditional sense. He had been a novelist before the war, and it was that novelist's imagination that would conceive this operation. Working alongside him was Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague, a naval officer and barrister by training, a man with the legal mind necessary to navigate the elaborate protocols and permissions required to make such an operation work. These two men, housed in nondescript offices in Whitehall, working under conditions of absolute secrecy, began to formulate a plan so outlandish that, had it been proposed at a planning meeting without their specific brief, it would have been laughed out of the room. The technical construction of mincemeat was extraordinary in its attention to detail. The operation required the creation of an entirely convincing false identity. A complete military record was fabricated for the body. He was given the rank of Major William Martin, with service number 148.228, supposedly an officer in the Royal Marines. Identification documents were created, forged with such care that they could withstand the scrutiny of German intelligence agencies. Photographs were taken. A letter from his fiancée was written. Personal items were purchased and aged to give the appearance of long ownership. Ticket stubs from cinemas, coins in the pockets, a love letter, a demand letter from an irate jeweler regarding an engagement ring. Every single item was calculated to create the impression of a real man, a real officer with a real life, someone whose sudden disappearance would provoke official concern and whose papers would be treated as significant intelligence rather than a suspicious plant. But the documents themselves, the items contained within the briefcase, required the most meticulous attention. The letters were written on official War Office-headed paper, obtained through legitimate channels. They were signed with the names of real officers, though those signatures were carefully forged. The documents discussed Operation Husky but referenced it as merely a secondary concern. The real invasion, according to these forged letters, was being prepared elsewhere. The documents hinted at Greece, at the Balkans, at landings in the south of France. They created the impression of a vast, coordinated series of operations across the entire Mediterranean, with Sicily as a mere sideshow, a diversion to draw attention from the real objectives. One letter, from a general in the planning staff to the commander of Middle Eastern forces, discussed Operation Husky in terms almost contemptuous in their casualness. So confident did these documents appear, so authentic in their bureaucratic detail, that when German intelligence analysts read them, they would be convinced. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The work of uncovering these stories, of verifying details across declassified archives and eyewitness accounts, takes time and resources. Your subscription directly supports that work. The body was prepared with extraordinary care. The corpse was kept in a secure facility, treated with a chemical preservative intended to protect it during the journey ahead. It was placed in a special container packed with dry ice. On April 30th, 1943, the corpse, along with the briefcase, was loaded aboard a Royal Air Force Catalina flying boat in Plymouth. The aircraft took off, flying south over the Bay of Biscay, heading towards the Spanish coast. The plan was to release the body into the water off Huelva, at a location carefully chosen by the intelligence services. Huelva was close to the Spanish coast but far enough out to allow the body to be discovered through natural means. The location was crucial because Huelva was known to be a center of German intelligence activity in Spain. The Spanish nationalist government, though officially neutral, maintained close ties with Nazi Germany. German agents were active in Spanish ports. When the body was discovered, the documents would make their way into German hands through channels that Montagu and Cholmondeley had carefully anticipated and exploited. The corpse surfaced as planned near Huelva on April 19, 1943. Spanish fishermen discovered it and, as expected, turned it over to Spanish authorities. The Spanish, honoring their neutral status, conducted an autopsy and then returned the body to the British military. But before returning it, Spanish officials had inspected the briefcase. And once the briefcase had been opened, once the contents were known to Spanish authorities, those contents could not help but be shared with German diplomats. The intelligence infrastructure of neutral Spain was deeply penetrated by German agents. German diplomats had sources within the Spanish military and government. Within a matter of days, photographs of the documents contained in that briefcase reached German hands. These photographs were examined, analyzed, and disseminated to the German High Command. The Germans believed them completely. When Hitler and the German General Staff analyzed the documents obtained through the discovery of Major William Martin's body, they became convinced that the invasion of Sicily was a minor operation, a diversion from the real strategic thrust. German forces were redeployed. Divisions that might have gone to Sicily were instead moved to the Balkans, to Greece, to southern France. The German Abwehr Intelligence Service reported with confidence that Major William Martin was genuine, that the documents were real, and that the Allies were planning operations very different from what their original assessments had suggested. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was convinced. German commanders across the Mediterranean theater accepted the intelligence without serious question. The deception had worked. When Operation Husky was launched on July 10, 1943, the invasion of Sicily proceeded with far less German resistance than had been feared. The initial landings, which military planners had estimated might cost 30,000 to 50,000 casualties, resulted in roughly 12,000 Allied casualties. The difference was the direct result of German forces having been misdirected by the false documents carried aboard a dead man's corpse. Where German divisions might have been concentrated in strength, the beaches were defended by lighter forces, by troops who were unprepared for the assault. The speed of the initial breakout, the rapid advance inland, the ability to secure airfields and establish supply lines, all of this was made possible by Operation Mincemeat. The invasion of Sicily, which could have been a catastrophic undertaking, became instead a remarkable success. The closest German equivalent to mincemeat was the Abwehr's Operation Fortitude, though it operated in reverse and with less success. The Germans had attempted to plant false intelligence suggesting that Operation Fortitude was an elaborate deception, that the real objective was somewhere other than Normandy. But German intelligence analysis was muddied by internal rivalries, by competing agencies that did not share information effectively, by a command structure that had grown suspicious of its own intelligence apparatus. The Americans, by contrast, had developed sophisticated deception capabilities through the Joint Security Control, but these were deployed primarily in support of existing operations rather than as the primary driver of strategic planning. The British approach, embodied in mincemeat, was unique. It was a deception so complete, so integrated with the military intelligence apparatus of the enemy, that it became the foundation upon which subsequent operations would be built. When D-Day itself was being planned, the lessons of mincemeat were applied on an even grander scale. Operation Fortitude North and Fortitude South, the deception operations designed to convince the Germans that the Normandy landings were merely a prelude to the real invasion elsewhere, drew directly from the playbook that Cholmondeley and Montague had written. The immediate impact of mincemeat on the Sicily campaign was measured in lives saved and operational success achieved, but the longer-term impact was perhaps even more significant. Mincemeat proved beyond question that strategic deception, properly constructed and integrated with intelligence operations, could reshape the course of military campaigns. It demonstrated that a sufficiently elaborate false intelligence operation could survive the scrutiny of a sophisticated enemy intelligence service. It showed that if you could exploit the enemy's own assumptions, if you could feed them information that fitted their existing preconceptions and fears, they would believe almost anything. These lessons were absorbed by British and American intelligence services and applied throughout the remainder of the war. The Operation Mincemeat archive remains partially classified even today, more than 80 years after the events themselves. Some documents have been declassified, released through the British National Archives. The story of Major William Martin, the dead soldier who became perhaps the most effective operative of the entire war, was eventually made public, though not until long after the death of those directly involved in the operation. The body of Glyndwr Michael, whose mortal remains became the vessel for this extraordinary deception, was eventually buried in a cemetery in Huelva, where it remains to this day. His grave bears the name of the man he impersonated, Major William Martin. It is a small memorial to an operation of vast consequence. What is remarkable, looking back across the decades, is how complete the deception was, how thoroughly it penetrated German thinking. The documents were examined by German intelligence officers who had no way of knowing that they had been carefully constructed by British military intelligence. The Germans, for all their technical sophistication and resources, found themselves completely fooled by what was essentially an elaborate confidence trick. The body in the water, the briefcase, the documents, the letters, the personal items, the identity papers, all of it was theater. But it was theater that changed the course of the war. The Germans believed in Major William Martin completely. They never suspected that his body had been deliberately placed in the waters off Huelva, that the documents in his briefcase had been carefully forged, that he had never existed at all. The deception worked because it was built on a foundation of authentic-seeming detail, because it exploited what the Germans already believed to be true, because it was executed by people who understood exactly how intelligence agencies actually functioned.